Despite the fact that they would be hailed as one of the most influential indie bands in American history, the California group Pavement never appeared to take themselves too seriously. Branded by some as slackers, founding member Scott Canberg would tell the LA Times in 1992, "Pavement is not a real band, it's more for fun." Half a decade into their career, Pavement would start seeing comparisons to alternative rock giants Nirvana, with the LA Times writing in 1994. While Nirvana introduced punk to the mainstream by fusing the abrasive genre with pop, Pavement meshes catchy melodies with experimental noise for the average kid who didn't attend art school. The group's sweet and sour sound hasn't earned them millions yet, but it has made Pavement college rock's newest superstars they'd write. Pavement was one of the first bands to revel in lo-fi production, with many indie rock groups following in their footsteps. Today, let's explore the history of the band Pavement. Pavement's history started with founding members Scott Canberg and Stephen Malkmus, who grew up in middle-class families in the farming town of Stockton, California. In an interview with Spin Magazine, the pair indicated that they knew each other since the age of 10, but in another profile that the LA Times wrote, they claimed they first met in high school in 1985. While Pavement wouldn't be formed until 1989, Canberg and Malkmus as teenage years helped them each foster their influences that would seep into Pavement's music. Canberg as a teenager was drawn to punk, electronic, and new wave music, while Malkmus cited Jimi Hendrix and punk as his own set of influences. In high school, Malkmus never fit in with any particular crowd, but played on the soccer and tennis teams without considering himself a jock. He would admit to Spin Magazine, "I was just nowhere. I was lost, basically. I should have been a computer nerd. I'd be happier now, but I thought computers were lame because my dad gave me some jock quotient." The pair started playing music together in the early to mid-80s, and during their high school years, they played in a number of bands and even performed at open mic nights. One of their first bands was called Bag of Bones, which blended together the styles of R.E.M., New Order, and Echo and the Bunnymen. After high school, Malkmus went off to the University of Virginia, earning a degree in history. It was there that he took up a job as a radio DJ at the college station, where he met another DJ named Bob Nastanovich in 1986. The pair played different styles of music on the radio, with Malkmus favoring more progressive styles of rock, while Nastanovich was more into obscure artists. The pair soon started a band named Ectoslavia, but it didn't really result in much. But years later, Nastanovich would join Pavement as a multi-instrumentalist. Canberg, for his part, had dreams of becoming an urban planner, but music soon took over and he returned home to Stockton. In between stints at university, Malkmus also returned home, where he reconnected with his old friend. According to Spin Magazine, in 1989 one night, the pair were hanging out, getting drunk, and writing a handful of songs utilizing guitar feedback and synthesized noise. This was the beginning of Pavement. The result would be an EP titled Slate Tracks 1933 to 1969, which they put out on their own label, Treble Kicker. The pair would enlist an older drummer named Gary Young, who was well renowned in Stockton's punk rock scene. It would be Young's studio where the trio recorded their first EP for around $800. Despite the fact that there were only a few copies of this EP in circulation, it eventually found its way to indie circles, who soon took notice of the band, most notably British DJ John Peel. Malkmus and Canberg used the pseudonyms SM and Spiral Stairs on the EP, creating an aura of mystery around the band. Malkmus and Canberg's middle-class upbringing seeped into their music, with Malkmus telling Mojo, "Whatever soul you have being a suburban kid like us, what can you do that's right that way? Because we're not Black Sabbath, we're not working class heroes, and we can't get away with that. Luckily, we're not hanging out at Met Bar either, we're not New York City hipsters or anything, so that's our earthiness," he'd say. Pavement soon signed with Chicago indie outfit Drag City, who put out the EP Demolition Plot J7 in 1990. The following year on the same label, they put out another EP titled Perfect Sound Forever. It paved the way, no pun intended, for their indie landmark 1992 debut LP, Slanted and Enchanted. The songs on Slanted and Enchanted dated back to 1990 and 1991, and following its release, the groundswell around the group couldn't be ignored, and major labels soon took notice. It seemed like more and more people were hearing about Pavement, even if they hadn't actually heard the group's music. And staying true to their indie roots, Malkmus and Canberg each served as the band's manager, producer, songwriters, and art directors. And it was an arrangement that Malkmus stood by, telling Billboard, "What bands should concentrate on is getting their own image and signifiers and their own language, so that it won't matter what the label is pushing. It just seems like the groups that are really successful, like U2 or R.E.M., it doesn't matter what label they're on, they have artistic control," he'd say. Following the recording of Slanted and Enchanted, bassist Mark Eibold and percussionist Bob Nastanovich would now be added to the lineup. With Slanted and Enchanted in the can, the band needed a label to distribute it, and while they could have had Drag City put it out, they wanted to reach a wider audience without losing their independence. So they reached out to New York City-based label Matador Records, who liked what they heard and agreed to sign the band and distribute the record. Matador would offer the group a $1,500 advance for the album, but it was a long drawn-out process to release the record, taking almost 15 months from the time it was recorded to when it finally hit the streets in April of 1992. Luckily for Pavement, alternative music was hugely popular at the time thanks to the Pacific Northwest. The album would make the top 10 of the college radio airplay charts in 1992 and would be hailed by critics as one of the best albums of the year. The album would go on to sell well over 100,000 copies, but interestingly enough, a spokesperson for Matador Records admitted to Billboard magazine that about 50 to 75% of the record sales came through catalogs, which were not statistically tracked by SoundScan, so the number of actual sales was probably a lot higher than what was reported. Canberg would look back at the record admitting to Spin, "We were experimenting with cool sounds. The melodies and lyrics and stuff were from 70s rock that was still in my head, the Eagles and Carole King he'd remember." The band would employ what would be referred to as slacker tuning, with Malcolmus telling Guitar World, "We didn't have a bass guitar on the early recordings, so tuning down gave us a lower sound, but also a fullness to the sound. That's where I started. Then I simplified even more by bringing my G string up to an A. I did a lot of things like that," he'd recall. Despite the band's indie streak, by 1993 some people thought they were finally getting serious about their career when drummer Gary Young left the group over his erratic and drunken behavior. His departure was attributed to his widely different musical tastes, his age, and the fact that he openly stated his lack of understanding of Pavement's popularity. His antics were also to blame, and they were heavily publicized, as he would sometimes put their live shows in jeopardy, as he would often disappear on stage or hand out vegetables to members of the audience. Nastanovich would recall his departure telling Spin, "We played Copenhagen the last show of our European tour, and afterwards we had a band meeting and Gary resigned in good standing. He felt like he's 41 years old, he needs to make money, he was completely exhausted. We just finished a 5-week tour, and the way he goes about touring is if he's going to keep doing that he needs some serious financial compensation." Following Young's departure, Stephen West, a schoolmate of Nastanovich, would join the group, and Pavement would begin working on their next LP, Crooked Rain. Crooked Rain would shatter any expectations fans had for Pavement, who went with a more straightforward rock and roll sound. Malcolmus would admit to Rolling Stone, "That's the album where I played the most with the California references. The imagery is West Coast, even though it was recorded in New York, and I was living there, and in Charlottesville," he would say. Meanwhile, in a separate interview with Spin Magazine, Malcolmus would reveal how his approach to lyric writing changed with Crooked Rain, saying, "On Slanted and Enchanted, my mom had this little Volkswagen Rabbit, and I would drive around with the rough tapes and sing along with the songs. But being in New York this time, I couldn't do that, so I was restricted to making up words in the studio. Plus, being in New York, there was rock music everywhere, whereas in Stockton, there was like no music," he'd remember. One of the songs found on the album would be Range Life, which would become one of Pavement's most popular tracks, and would also mention the Smashing Pumpkins, who were huge at the time. The Smashing Pumpkins leader Billy Corgan was not very happy with the reference, and it would ignite a 2 decades long feud. I've covered that in much more detail in a separate video, the link is down below. Crooked Rain, for its part, never had any big promotional push, and the group's label Matador was pretty blunt with Billboard magazine, noting that they would rely heavily on word of mouth and a few singles, but not much else. The label wasn't stupid though. They were using the exact same playbook that had worked so well for Slanted and Enchanted. It was this attitude that led some in the press to say that the band had a slacker attitude that prevented them from being more successful than they were. The band's agreement with their label allowed them to be in full creative control, resulting in Matador sometimes finding out on short notice when new material would be released. But Malcolmus would admit to Spin that he did feel a lot of pressure around the time of Crooked Rain, revealing, "This was a more worrisome record to make than Slanted and Enchanted. When we were making Slanted, we didn't even have anyone to put it out. It was like, well, maybe Drag City will put it out, but with this one, we knew there was anticipation," he'd say. Despite the band's independence, they still sometimes butted heads with Matador on their music videos. Canberg would tell the LA Times, "Hundreds of thousands of dollars are spent in the studio on the majority of music these days, and you can make a good record for a tenth of that. The music industry has gotten so sick. For instance, we never wanted to do videos, but we decided to do one because it was kind of fun maybe. They were saying we'd have to spend about $100,000 for it to be MTV material. We were like, give us a break. So we ended up compromising and spent $15,000, which is still too much in my opinion," he'd say. The following year, the band would put out Wowie Zowie in April of 1995, and much like Weezer's Pinkerton that came out the following year, Both records seem to be the subject of revisionist history. The album was met with universal disappointment, with the exception of The Village Voice, who held up the album as one of Pavement's finest works. The sentiment against Wowee Zowee seemed to change when Pavement released their follow-up album in 1997, Brighten the Corners. To promote Wowee Zowee, the band spent the summer of 1995 as part of the traveling Lollapalooza tour with Sonic Youth, Hole, Beck, and Moby. Mark Ibold would look back at the reaction to the album, telling the Orlando Sentinel, "They try to explain our moves as if we're calculated. I think people thought Wowee Zowee was this move by Pavement to almost shoot ourselves in the foot after the success of Crooked Rain. It's not at all something we intended to do. We want people to love us, we want to be loved, and we really like that record. And this one, they're all saying it's like, oh, some sort of comeback or something. And that's nice for them to say that, but I mean, if it's a comeback, we must be doing really good because Wowee Zowee was, I thought, a pretty good record." By 1999, the band released their fifth studio album, Terror Twilight, and it was around the time of the record's release that there were rumors that cracks were starting to show in Pavement. Malkmus would deny these rumors at the time, admitting that Terror Twilight was the last album the band was required to deliver as part of their contract with Matador, telling MTV, "If we do make another record, we have to devise some other way of making it fresh and get better performances out of everybody and having everyone have more of an input. So if that's a challenge you want to take, then that takes a lot of work to do. There's 5 people in the band. It takes a lot of time to do a record, and we live in different places. So Pavement fans, I wouldn't get your hopes up or down," he would say. Unfortunately for the band's label Matador, their longtime distributor Capitol Records would sever ties with the label, hurting album sales. Not helping was that the tour to support the album was fraught with internal tensions. Malkmus would hardly speak with his bandmates, and at their appearance at Coachella in 1999, it was reported that the frontman turned the group's performance into a mostly instrumental set after refusing to sing. Their final gig of the decade would take place at the Brixton Academy, where Malkmus dangled a set of handcuffs from a mic stand and reportedly told the crowd that night, and I quote, "These symbolize what it's like being in a band." By 2000, Malkmus would admit to Enemy magazine that the band was over, and for the next decade, other musical priorities took over the band members' lives. But in 2010, the band would reunite for a worldwide tour, with some shows selling out within minutes. Then the band would take a hiatus for almost another decade, and on June 1st, 2019, Pavement announced they would be reuniting to perform 2 30th anniversary shows in the summer of 2020, but due to the global situation, those dates have now been pushed back to 2022. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again on Rock and Roll Your Stories. Take care.